men should have more of an intrinsic value beyond the paycheck they provide.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They should provide a paycheck. They should masculinity, a man who practices masculinity and lives up to a man's duties and responsibilities should provide stability to his family and his loved ones, right? That's a paycheck. That's whatever stability means in your universe. But in our society, a lot of like your only, like it feels like your only value is your paycheck, is what you in that's all you bring to the table, is your ability to generate resources, right? Now, that's a big part of it, but also men
Pretty
get
humanizing.
lost. It's dehumanizing. Men get lost in that, right? Not that my wife is like that or my life is like that at all, but that's the thing all men carry.
I've got a friend, actually someone in my family who once told me about someone he worked with who was so, I don't know if you want to call it right wing or just libertarian, basically what it is, like poor libertarian, who was so that way, whatever you want, whatever, just whatever label you want to ascribe to it, that he would he basically seemed to, he was of the opinion that if he couldn't provide for his family, they should starve because he failed and they should starve instead of going on like assistance or something, because that would take from someone else. So,
well, that's fucked up.
Yeah, but that's the way we've talked about it. This is the way some people think. I was listening to the podcast, I think actually the one from a couple weeks ago, where you were talking about how you were doing something, you were recording something, dealing like you're trying to explain the way poor white people think, or like white people in poverty think, so that people who aren't in that situation can understand it. And that's part of what it is. It's a type of brainwashing that literally makes you think, oh, I not only am in this shitty situation, I've earned this shitty situation, and I don't want help because that would make me weaker. It would take my dignity in addition to my paycheck, or something along those
lines. And to build off of that, it's a scarcity mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's not
zero sum. It's thinking everything is a zero sum game. Someone else has to lose for you to win, or you have to lose for someone else to win.
For example, I don't want to fucking cast stones at anybody. Let's say I believe one way, right? And I live in a really scarce mindset. Mm-hmm. I believe one thing in one way. And if there's a scarcity mindset, there's only enough room for one way of living, mm-hmm. right? And if you, Nick, if my way of living is I don't like to wear socks, but you like to wear socks, and there's only enough room for one of us, and if you wear socks, well then fuck, I gotta wear socks too, right? And when you realize, oh, you could both do what you want, like you wearing socks does not negate me not wearing socks, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so, but there's people that don't want to wear socks, who, when people are allowed to wear socks, they feel threatened. They think, oh, well, I have to wear socks now. When you want to say, no, dude, nobody is going to make you wear socks. Like, you're good. Just they want to wear socks, and that's cool. And you don't want to wear socks, also cool. And everyone pays their taxes, and we're good. Right? Yeah. We all drive on the same roads,
Basically.
And yeah, and that's the thing I've been kind of workshopping in my brain for a long time. And I didn't actually finish that recording I made.
You should.
I kept screaming into the phone. So I was mining that fucking vein for truth, and I mined too deep, and I'm like, ah! And so really I thought, oh, well, I kind of explained all of it to Nick on that episode, so that's going to be the recording. That's going to be me expressing that idea in that way. And And otherwise, I get so wrapped up and I'm just like screaming into the phone, and I'm like, well, that's not audio is not even usable, is it? But no, I like being able to also to take kind of that experience, because I know what like a shitty rundown place looks like, so I can write Europa pretty well. I like to think I can add nice players to it, right? This isn't to say you don't, but I think part of what I do with Europa Goodbye and everything we work on together is I take stuff out and I add stuff where I think is necessary. And I love that you're taking, like, if I add 100 words, you'll keep 50 words, right? And you'll kind of like make that sound more like what you do. Oh, it's the most delicious one. I had a question for you.
Yes.
Did we talk about that phone call we had where you called to ask about wanting to change the lore?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't think we talked about it on the podcast, so we'll pretend we didn't. And
oh, are you talking about the medic thing?
No.
Oh,
the time.
The what?
Years. You wanted to change all the years, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think now I remember.
This leads me to a much deeper train of thought. I think I talked to you a little bit about it off mic. So you've been working on the Spacers Saga for about 20 years, and you changed the lore a lot, right? This isn't a criticism. This is an observation.
Yeah.
And at least a couple of times since I've known you. And we had this really kind of special moment for me. It was, at least, where, I was on a walk and you called me and you said, hey man, I'm thinking about changing the lore. Right. And I was like, go on. And I had like a really bad day, nothing to do with you, but I was just like, those days where you feel like you're in a ring and you hit a bunch of times in the face, right? Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
And so you call me, and I wasn't in a good mood, but it wasn't your fault. So I was trying to like not be a dick, you're like, you hate everything, but your best friend calls you and you're like, don't be a piece of shit about it. And so then you call and you say, hey, I'm thinking about changing these years to this. And I'm like, well, why? And you're like, oh, well, if you look at it, if you zoom out to 30,000 feet, it looks like this and these things here and all this changes. And I'm like, well, does that affect the day-to-day life of Janet and Shadowplay or Darius and Europa Goodbye? And you're like, well, it does, but at this big level and all this stuff. And then I said, why do you want to change it? And then I realized, oh, this was his kind of safe spot. This was a security blanket for you since you were a little kid. This is a universe you've been developing, right? And I got to imagine when life got hard, this is where you went. When because you've talked a few times about how school was hard for you because you were different than everybody, and you probably didn't know why, or you probably didn't. I don't even know if society really understood autism at that level when you were a kid.
Still doesn't to a certain extent, but yeah.
I barely do, and I talk to you all the time.
And I mean, it's more. There's more than that to it. It's not just like school; it's also family stuff that I won't necessarily get into for the sake of our listeners. I like to say, like I had it pretty good as a kid. I'm not trying to like poo-poo on you by any means, but like when I hang out with you and some of our other mutual friends, I'm like, holy shit, I got lucky as a kid. But everything is relative. When you're living most of your life with a guy whose basic response to everything is to shout and yell, and you get like traumatized because of that, that has an effect on your development as an adult and as a human. When your parents divorce when you're 2 years old, and your mom leaves, and doesn't come back for a couple of years, and you're kind of like, and you're at this very formative age where it's like, well, my mom has been taken away from me. She left me. it's one of those things, where knowing her nowadays and knowing how well I get along with her and how often I talk to her, in fact, I need to call her when I'm done here because I wasn't able to earlier. But anyway, it's not her fault. That was a falling out between her and my dad. It's their business. They've come to terms with it. They're on good terms now. They actually get along. They're amicable. My dad has done all sorts of errands to help my mom over the years and help me mutually. But the thing is, it has an effect on a kid, that sort of thing. Having a stepfather who's as demanding as mine was, and is always trying to push me to be better. It's like, yeah, I get what you're trying to do by trying to push me to be better, but you're also sort of pushing me away because instead of just accepting me for as I am, you're telling me that I'm not good enough. So all of these things, I've got some issues. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So what you're saying about how this universe has been sort of like my one constant is pretty much true, because I like what I told you. I think it was that day when we had that conversation. If I remember correctly, I was standing in the front driveway at my aunt and uncle's house here in Maryland, and you were on a walk, and as you said, and I was just sort of pacing around, and I was thinking, and we talked about how, oh yeah, this universe was like my imaginary world when I was a kid. Some kids have imaginary friends. I had an imaginary world, and when other kids were like playing tag on the playground, I was imagining like movies in my head, and I just sort of kept with it for from the time I was like 10 years old to now. So yeah, it's so back to what you were saying. Go ahead.
It's your not only is it it's your imaginary friends, it's your imaginary world. It's a place that you can control in a life that is sometimes sounds like you felt like you didn't have much control at times, and so you built this universe as a way to kind of find the control that you never really felt you had, or like it's a safe space that you control it and stuff, and if you want me to stop swimming in your belly button, let me know.
You're good, dude. We swim in your belly button so much. I need to have mine wetted a little bit.
It's yeah. But that's a sentence you never thought you'd say out loud.
Yeah, probably not. But I've said weirder things, and I've thought weirder things. So
that's fair enough, sir. And so it must be interesting, probably difficult on a couple of levels, because that was always a spot that always fungible whenever it was in a place you could exercise creativity. And now working with me, again, the first time I didn't, again, I wasn't, now I'm a hippie granola Derwin. And before I was, angry, like Iraq war veteran Derwin. And those are two very different Derwins. Like one of them yelled a lot more. But I didn't have the emotional intelligence back then to kind of see why you were so protective of everything, right? And so I understand, a lot of what happened there now, a lot better. And
which is very, it's a very sort of, full circle thing, because I'm in a better place where I can share this sort of stuff now. You understand where I was coming from, but I also understand now where you're coming from and wanting to collaborate and share the lore. And we both meet in the middle, like you said before. It's kind of, we've kind of come full circle.
And I gotta wonder if it's because it's almost like settling down a bit, or maybe it's in a bit of a walk or saying goodbye to some imaginary friends, where I'm like, hey, we kind of have to like find a story and stick to it, right?
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want as long as it's like a consistent timeline, like, or as consistent as, like, say Star Trek is.
Well, for the sake of our listeners, the main bit of lore that I wanted to change was I wanted to shave a century off of the Spacers Saga universe. And I ended up not doing that because I'll sort of start from the beginning. I'll tell the whole story because again that's what we're here for. Basically, the Spacer Saga is an alternate history in addition to being a future history. It starts in 1989 when an asteroid hits Earth instead of not hitting Earth, which is what happened in the real world. Asteroid hits Phoenix, Arizona, vaporizes it. World changes, so on and so forth. This is March of 1989. The main, what I call the main story, the story that we I think mentioned last time, which is the one involving the main characters that you haven't met yet, the main characters that are basically my original imaginary friends, is set in 2389. The reason I chose that year is because it's 400 years after the Phoenix event. It's a good milestone. It's like, we're jumping 400 years forward in history.
It's like when we celebrated the 500 years of Columbus discovering North America in 1992.
Yes, exactly. Something like that. Discovering North America, of course.
Well,
in air quotes.
Everything, it's shorthand.
Yes, no, I get it. I can't let that go by me without sniping at it. I'm not even sniping at you. I'm sniping at Columbus because he deserves it.
The 90s were a different time.
Well, I mean, to be fair, the linking up of the old world and the new world didn't really happen in major part in major form until after 1492. Now, whether or not that was a good thing can be debated, but it did happen after that. It changed the world. So that's the important part.
I'm glad it did because my house is here in the New World.
Mm-hmm.
I would have rather than not have been the genocides. That would have been nice. But anyway, so with this main story of yours that I haven't read, do you have novels written that I don't know about?
No, nothing finished. The only ones I have finished are Spacers, which we obviously sort of shelved because it's no longer consistent, barring some alternate realities, hand waving that we want to bring into the story later on. Shadow Play, which is the first novel I ever finished. I wrote that, but again, I think that the story that's probably been shared here before, but I wrote that between October of 2017 and March of 2018 after I saw Blade Runner 2049. That was kind of my response to Blade Runner 2049. I wrote it during 5 of the last months of my undergraduate career, which was fun because I started writing another novel right after, and it was basically writing these novels in the computer labs of IUPUI. But anyway, I've got that one, and then I've got I think that's about it. Everything else is still only partials. I've got about 8 chapters written of alphas. I've got about 8 chapters written. You're sensing a pattern here, I'm sure. I've got about 8 chapters written of a story, 8 or 9 maybe chapters of a story written of a story called the Titan Gambit, which is the first installment in the Frontier Wars, saga, which is this is what I keep calling the main story, the Spacers Saga Frontier Wars. It's the story of 3 guys named Devin, Matt, and Sam, who are best friends from the capital of Mars. They are reservists in the Spacer Corps when the Frontier Wars kick off again, and they go on and they go off to fight, and the story ensues from there. That's been partially written, and there's a whole bunch of other things that's little piddling parts here and there that I started to write, and I was I got bored, or I decided I wanted to write something else, or both. And a lot of these things just are begging to be finished someday, and I've got them either on my Google Docs or I've got them on my portable hard drive. And there's the rub. I just need to get around to writing them all.
You should send them to my Developed by Zero Books Gmail.
Yeah.
Just to have, so let's say you step off a curb and get hit by a bus tomorrow.
Yep.
That way I can finish them.
I'll tell you what I can do. I will, because I'm trying. In fact, we'll go ahead and keep talking. I'm going to open up my portable hard drive and see how much space these things take up. Because if they don't, depending on how much space they take up, I can just post the whole thing on Google Docs. And
there you go.
Yeah, the whole thing only takes up like 1.5 gigabytes.
There you go. I love it. And we'll go through and knock these out one at a time.
Yeah.
Like,
well,
or we'll turn into short stories. We'll cannibalize them.
I mean, that's the beauty of it. The sky is the limit with these stories, because and like I said, I'm the type of writer who every so often, maybe once every month or two at most, I'll get a new idea come to me in a dream.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I'll have a dream that's so vivid that I wake up like, oh, I got to write that down because it makes for a good story. I've got a story that I want to write that came to me in a dream, and it was so moving that when I woke up, I was crying.
That's beautiful, man. What's the story?
It's a story. I don't remember what I called it, but it's a story about two guys from Titan. It's at least as the lore goes now. It's two guys from Titan. One of them was a son. One of them is like a rich scion, and the other one is like a poor kid from the wrong side of the tracks. And somehow they became best friends. Like, maybe the poor kid saved the rich kid when he was out, like, he ran away from home and he was like about to be beat up by some bullies because he was rich. So the poor kid saved him and they became best friends. They started hanging out. Then war comes to Titan, and they both, like, the rich kid defies his family and joins, the local militia to help fight the Draconis threat. And the other, and they sort of stick together. They sort of protect each other. And they both, and one of the things that comes straight out of this dream is they both love the same woman. They're both in love with the same girl who loves them both, but doesn't really love either one of them, if that makes any sense. She doesn't love either one of them that much, enough to be with them, that is. And through the course of all the violence that ensues on Titan and all the civil war and everything, she dies, and that kind of drives a wedge between them. And eventually, the poor character, I can't remember what happened in the dream, because it goes one way or the other. One of the characters, either the poor character or the rich character, goes career in the military, and it's basically like trying to fight through the Draconis and like trying to restore order to Titan, which is something we could workshop if we ever write it. So depending on which way it goes, it would make more sense. The other character leaves the military and basically becomes a resistance fighter, trying to help people without being part of the establishment. And later on in life, after they've had a wedge driven between them, even though they were like brothers for a long time, they meet up and they basically get into an argument that turns into a fist fight. And after they leave, some old guy who maybe knew them before or something's like, why are you, tells the one guy who's still standing there in the restaurant, like where his friend came to visit him, he tells him, are you gonna go stop him and apologize? And he says, well, why should I? So I can tell your brother you should get over this, or something like that. It's one of those things where it makes you cry in your sleep, because when you're unconscious, it seems so emotional. It's not really that emotional after the fact, but we could probably make it emotional if we wrote it right.
I so want to do that. I love that. I love the idea of
humans being humans.
Yeah, humans being humans, people falling apart, people remembering how much they love someone and so furious because the other person doesn't love them back, or the love is broken, or the family's broken, or whatever. Like, that sort of deep aching pain. Oh fuck, I understand that shit. Like,
and I understand how to tie it into the larger lore.
That's why we work together. So you understand it because you just threw the story at me, right? So don't ever sell yourself short.
No, I'm not saying, I get, trust me, even as a proud autistic man, I get human emotion. I just don't always subscribe to it.
I love how you're like, as an autistic man, I understand human emotions, right? Says the robot.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Basically. That's funny. Oh man. No, but seriously, I teach you sometimes. You do understand human emotions
Yeah,
and
I
stuff.
mean, it's sometimes foreign to me, but I think that's, if anything, the thing that makes it, and this is again kind of a non sequitur, the thing that makes autism, my form of autism, or autism the way it presents for me, so infuriating, is that I have like, I can sort of like stand at the window and look in at people having regular emotions, and I'm like, I can interpret, I can read their lips, but I can't quite fucking hear what they're saying. That's kind of how it
Yeah,
is.
that makes sense. Um, yeah, and that's one of the things that always kind of fascinated me about you. Was like, oh, you see the world so differently. And after I realized you're autistic in class, or you told me, or both, one of the two, whatever, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Like,
I
it
remember
makes a
that
lot more sense now.
conversation.
Yeah. You got people throwing internships at you and like job offers or opportunities, if not offers. As you gain more success in life, women will find that more attractive. I'm not trying to sound like some fucking alpha male incel or something, but I know when I was a broke ass loser, I wasn't getting any dates. Not to say you're a broke ass loser, but with my own experience, when I stopped being a broke ass loser, I found a woman who is far above my station. And she was like, yeah, you can marry me. I'm like, oh, yes, I did it. And now I can rest on my laurels.
Now you just get to coast.
No, I just get to the coast. No, it's a constant. Like, I'm always running at 100 miles an hour.
No, I know. I mean, like, you don't have to like. Wait, I guess that's a good point. You're not really coasting, even as far as like a relationship, because you're always trying to like continually court that person.
It changes. You change. And I've been with Meg for 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. It's fucking the longest single person I've ever been in a relationship with ever. And it's because, like you said, I'm hippie granola Derwin now. She met me when I was angry Iraq war vet Derwin. And the change she's seen. And she's changed too. And as the things that you need from me, a lot of the early dating is, it's exciting and it's fun and it's sexy and it's flirty and all that, and that's great. But a lot of it is you're auditioning. You're like, hey, this is who I am, and this is what I'm like, and what do you think, and what are you like, and what are you really like, and this is what I'm really like. And if I show you what I'm really like, are you gonna be cool? And if you show me what you're really like, and am I gonna be scared? And and there's this weird dance, because kind of the question you're asking the other person is, are you going to be my ride or die or what?
Yeah.
And like, as a husband, as a man and stuff, and the other show, it's about this a lot. I'm constantly trying to evolve and trying to find to be a more combat effective husband, I guess.
Yeah.
It's the way I like to describe it. Because if you're a combat effective husband, to me, that means that you have such a high level of emotional intelligence that your head is just screwed on real tight. And if you have a bad day, like I was telling you earlier, I was feeling isolated because I was working from home today. And when you're feeling isolated, your first thought is, oh, I should run toward my tribe.
Yeah.
But then with that gear in my head, I was like, oh, well, my tribe's broken. I don't talk to them. And so you've got this like rocket fuel that's telling you to run toward your tribe, but your tribe is dangerous. So it's kind of a weird feedback.
Yep.
But yeah, being married is pretty awesome though.
Mm-hmm.
And fuck, I can talk about this all day.
Yeah.
But it's just somebody that gets you and wants to get you and knows all of your shit, and you know all theirs. But you can keep probably what will be one day 15 finished, fully published novels straight in your head. at the same time with a different cast of characters and all that.
Supposedly.
Yeah, like you get what I'm saying. Like you can zoom out and see a whole solar system and all the intricate histories of it for thousands, if not billions of years in your head. But like you said, how with human emotions, sometimes you're the homeless boy looking in at the family having Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
And so sometimes in your writing, and it's not to say that any of your characters are bad or anything, they're not, but I can tell where your focus is, and I can tell what you're interested in. Now, me, then that's probably what working with me works out really well, because I'm not really the zoom out guy like that, right? I'm not even, if I was, I would have done that by now. I work better kind of when I drop into other people's sandboxes and work in their worlds and say, hey, because like my partnership with you was very similar to the one I had on A Thin Line of Life, where I'm like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Does it fit with what you had in mind?
Yeah, basically just collaborating back and forth, trying to turn one person's idea into two people's success. Exactly. And that didn't really even sound right to say, because it's like, it's not really you like parasitizing someone, you're bringing things to the table. That's the thing. If someone, there's a difference between like parasitizing someone else's success and creativity and adding your own creativity to that mix. Some people, again, you obviously have creativity that can work on its own. But I think what you just said about how you're happy, you seem to be happiest when you have someone else who can who can take the first step, can put the first stuff on paper, and then you can start playing with it.
I have more fun rewriting your first draft of something. Well, maybe not more fun. I have a lot of fun rewriting your first draft of something. I haven't really written a whole lot of original material on my own for a couple of years, because I've been so busy trying to build the podcast and build the business and build Divided by Zero books and all that. But I have the most fun, the most creative fulfillment I get is condensing your book and adding in corners and like finding ways to because like, to go into the analogy, I've got a seat at the Christmas table for the human emotions. Some days it's fucking overwhelming. They're so strong. It's so I can kind of take that and pencil that in with some life experience. Also, too, man, something that's really fucking cool about what you do is you're kind of having like your first major like adventure from home right now, right?
Yeah.
So everything else you've created, like, in terms of Spacers and stuff, has been just you imagining things based off other stories you've read, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now you're getting to, because Epitaph, I could see where you're like, oh, it's a young scientist talking to an older scientist. And I'm like, oh, well, this is what he's doing now. He just took these experiences and put them in a story. And now you're living life. You're not reading about life anymore. You're fucking living it, dude. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons can bring a lot of like color to the books you write is because I've lived a lot of life. I've lived so much fucking life sometimes.
The candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long. You have burned so very brightly, Derwin.
Kind of, yeah. I was hanging out with my Marine buddy Tom, and he's like, "Yeah, Derwin, you're probably physically somewhere in your 50s. I'm somewhere in my mid 70s." I'm like, "Well, fuck." Just turned 36. He's like, "That doesn't matter." But when you live a lot of, because I remember being a teenager living at home thinking, oh, I can't wait to enlist in the army so I can have something to say, so I can live life and have experiences to write down and be a writer that way.
Mm-hmm.
And And honestly, I like not having the responsibility of having to keep lore at 30,000 feet all straight, because sometimes I get shit mixed up. Sometimes I forget. That's a lot of details. I'm not a 30,000 foot guy, right? Not with writing. Other things I am, but not with writing.
And I think real quick, we should make it, at least I want you can refute this if you wish, that's your right. Yeah. I want to make a disclaimer that if one of our dear listeners is thinking of enlisting in the military for the sake of having things to write about, your results may vary.
I mean, it kind of worked out for me. And yes, there was years of therapy involved, and but I mean, I survived the pandemic. Anybody who survived the pandemic went to therapy. It's fine. But no, it was, I was a fucking poor kid in the trailer park, and then okay, I say trailer park is shorthand, right? I only really lived in a trailer park for maybe 4 or 5 years. And honestly, the trailer park was probably one of the more stable places we lived.
Yeah.
And so I just gotta tell people, oh, trailer park, because if I say, oh, I was a poor kid from the trailer park, that little shorthand, people understand. There's a lot packed into that little sentence. But I'd always tell people all the expanded versions of things. But no, the military is really good if you need like structure and guidance, and or really just a start in life. And sometimes, yeah, you need something to say, or you want, because everything I was writing just kind of felt like I was bastardizing Lord of the Rings.
I've told you this, haven't I? Basically, when I started writing, and I wasn't even writing, I was basically just making things up and like imagining scenarios, like some like lonely people do. Except in this case, I was like using my imagination to create like movie scenes in my head. When I started creating the Spacers Saga, or wasn't even called the Spacers Saga, it didn't really have a name. I just called it my stuff or something like that. My thinking. Almost 20 years ago now. It'll be 20 years ago next year, probably. I had just watched the Lord of the Rings movies. I had just watched Star Wars Attack of the Clones, and I had just watched things like Alien and Aliens and Predator and Jurassic Park, and I had all these things sort of bouncing around in my head, and I was like, ooh, I want to take all of these ideas and sort of lump them together and make something that is mine. And that's kind of how it started. I mean, Spacers Saga basically started off as a combination of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. That's kind of how it started.
I knew we watched the same things growing up. So let me ask you this, sir. Go back in time 20 years.
Yeah.
Tell that little kid that not only are you working with an independent publisher on the Spacers Saga, but also you're working professionally with NASA, and you're going to school at a prestigious university. How do you think that kid is going to react?
He'd probably look at me skeptically. He'd probably say, "I don't think so."
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because there's an inside joke that my aunt actually reminded me of, the aunt that I'm staying with. For the sake of our listeners, I will explain this inside joke. In my family, my mom has 2 brothers. The brother that I'm staying with now for the summer internship program is a bit of a jokester. He likes to tell sarcastic jokes and make puns and things like that. And he's always been that way. And when I was a little kid, he tried to tell me something, and he was telling me some white lie, trying to pull my chain and see how I responded. And my aunt says, I looked at him with this kind of skeptical look on my face and said, "I don't think so, Uncle Mark." And that's become like a running joke in their family. Like, even though I've long since forgot about it, they still tell each other that year, like to this day, as sort of an in joke, because it stuck with them. And that's probably what I would tell myself, or tell the future me if I came out of a time warp. I'd be like, you look kind of You look kind of fat and weird. I don't believe you. You're fat and hairy. Why should I believe you?
I know what you mean. If I go back in time 20 years, I gotta be 16. To say, hey man, this is what happens. I honestly would be scared to tell myself just how well everything works out.
Mhm.
Because there were several points in my timeline where if I wasn't desperate to the point of like just fucking desperate, like you will it when you're desperate and on the verge of complete failure,
Mhm.
and you're doing everything you can not to succeed but just to keep from failing.
Yep.
And oh boy, you'll try really hard. You know, you either sink or you swim. And fuck man, I was swimming, dude. And there's a little part of me that's like, I don't want to tell him that it's going to work out, because what if he says, well, future me told me it worked out, so why am I fucking worrying so hard? In my head, I'm like, because if I didn't try that hard, if I didn't swim that hard, I it probably wouldn't have worked out. So, but if you take that off the table, you go back in time and say, hey, you kind of do everything you want to do. That's a pretty good feeling if you think about it, sir.
Yep.
And I get the feeling
Totally.
you are doing everything you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of cool.
Yep.
And I think we can end there, and we'll talk a little bit afterward.
Yep.
For the Blank Fortress Solitude, I am Derwin.
I am Nick.
We will see you next Monday morning at 0700.
Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
Read? What's happening? Am I dead?
I bet you like zombie books.
I like food. Do you have food?
You don't need food at dividedbyzerobooks.com. It's full of nutrient-rich science fiction.
Ugh, I'm stuck in an ad, aren't I?
Once I stop talking, reality will collapse until someone plays this ad again. This isn't the first time we've had this discussion, and it won't be the last. Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?